A different one.
Anytime, right?
Gotcha.
Anytime you have the Hebrew, it has his name written in Hebrew, and
Gotcha.
in Hebrew there's no J in Hebrew. This is the thing for all the Jews. Again, Jews,
No
Judea, Job. For all of the things, welcome everyone around the world and here in Topeka and in Kansas. We're going to be studying Job today. We will be, but we were just talking about Job. Yeah, Job. There is no J, of course. In Hebrew, it's a yud, which makes a y sound. So you have Yehudi, which is where you get Jew from, Yehud. You have Yehuda for Judah, and you have, in this case, Eeyov, which is our friend Job.
With a V, Eeyov.
Yes, with a vet at the end.
Okay.
The same way Yaakov, which is Jacob, is Yaakov with a v at the end because it's a vet. But see, when Christians and other non-Hebrew speakers when they were translating, turning it into English letters, transliterating, I guess you would say, they didn't see the difference between bet and vet. Now, a bet is when you have this letter.
Yeah.
This is a bet, and it makes a b sound,
right.
B'nai. But this is, look, it looks the same, right? But there's no dot in the middle, no dagesh. So what sound does it make? V. It's a vet, not a bet. To be a bet, it needs the dot. But this is one of the nuances that the writers of, for instance, the King James, and all these early English versions of the Bible were not able to quite grasp. So we've got Jacob in English because the y becomes a j. This is how you get Jehovah from Yud Hey Vav Hey, by the way.
Yeah.
How do you get from Yehovah, if you were going to, God forgive me, try and pronounce the ineffable name of God? How do you get from Y to Jehovah? You need to pronounce the Y as a J. So that's how you get Jehovah. Comes from this, the holy ineffable name of God, but they replaced the y with a j at the beginning. Gotcha. So that's one thing they would do, and they would also forget the dageshes and stuff. So that makes a difference between like P and F for pay and fay, B and V for bet and vet. So Yaakov becomes Jacob, right? Eeyov becomes Yob or Job, which becomes Job, the way we pronounce it. So you see what I mean? So
let's see, you're getting a view into the joys of my life at ages 7 and 8.
There you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. I grant that it's dense.
Every language has got its.
But this is part of how Jews. It's important, I think, for everyone, wherever we are, online or here. Oh, and I need to share the screen. Of course, the people online haven't been seeing any of the things I've been zooming in on, but
well, this is why I wanted to study with you all, because I wanted to understand the Hebrew. I think translations have messed up a lot of what the communication is in this
absolutely book. In fact, even Jews use different translations to triangulate the meaning of the text, right? We have what's it called? Do you know the Targum Onkelos? Do you know the Targum Onkelos? Targum means translation. Targumim are different translations of the Torah. So maybe the Greek Septuagint, which was the first non-Hebrew version of the Torah, right? The Greeks made the Septuagint because they wanted to write the books of Moses down in a language they could understand. And that brought in the first. And so as we've taken different versions that we've seen over time, how do we see what's the real one and what were changes made? It's by looking at the overlaps of different Targumim over time. So it's not just other people who need to do this. Jews do the same thing because there isn't one scroll that Moses passed down over 3,000 years, unfortunately. We don't have any of those. The oldest scroll we have is about 2,200 years old. Maybe 23 or 24. From the time of Isaiah, we think. So we think there's maybe Isaiah, maybe Jeremiah. We think that maybe not Isaiah, late Isaiah. Like we think about 200 years after the destruction of the kingdoms.
Is that from the Dead Sea Scrolls then?
It could be, or it may actually be an older one. Now that I think, I mean, it may be older than the Dead Sea Scrolls are more Second Temple era.
Yeah.
So they're more the Essenes. Again, they were from the Essenes, and they would be a couple 200 years after.
Real first temple?
No, not first temple. Nothing from the first temple. There's nothing from the first temple. The first temple was Solomon's temple. That was 1000 BCE. We don't have anything from that except for the city of David, where we are excavating. Let me just clarify what I just said. We don't have anything from that. We do have excavations that show the groundwork of like the paths from the pools of where you prepare yourself to go up to the temple mount. Like we do have these things that prove these places were there, but like, do we have like a piece of the first temple? No, we don't have a piece of the first temple. We don't know. We don't have like the way we have the Western Wall, at least as a retaining wall of the second temple. We at least have that. We don't have anything from the first. The first temple also was much smaller, much less. It was big for the time, but it wasn't as big as Herod's temple, which was like a supersized version of the first temple. Anyway,
I don't think you should be unhappy. Greco-Roman and Christian stuff doesn't go back that far either.
Well, I mean, their civilizations fell apart. There's a different, and ours was forced apart, but we all try and get what we can, I guess.
Right.
But in any event, we'll turn our attention now away from the Hebrew and the history and to chapter 2 of Job. Now, as a quick refresher, since it's been a couple of weeks since we did this, our friend Eeyov was super duper rich and had lots of kids and grandkids and had a lot of influence, and he was a good guy. And God said, what a good guy that is. Look, he's got everything a guy could want, and he's still a good guy. Isn't that great? And all the other angels were like, yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool. We don't like people that much. The angels aren't big fans of human beings, remember? They don't love us that much. They're very jealous of us in some midrashim for God's love and for us while giving us free will, which angels don't have. Angels are servants of God, but forced servants of God. Humans are servants of God, but we can choose not to be if we want to.
So they're jealous.
Well, that's some interpretation of it. So they're not usually huge fans.
Well, and
Hasatan has a very specific role. So Hasatan is the prosecutor of the heavenly court, and Hasatan, or the advocate, or the opposer, or the adversary in this translation, or Satan, if you want, because it's the same thing. This is where the name Satan comes from. His name is Hasatan. It's a title, not a name. But since we don't have another name for him, I mean, you can guess. I mean, I know other traditions have names for this guy, but we call him Hasatan. That's just his role is to be this enforcer. He's the not even enforcer. He's the prosecutor. He's the arguer who give. Literally, this is where you would get the devil's advocate without the devil in there. He's playing the other side so that so that the heavenly court has balance. So that it's not just, right? Because otherwise, what else would this look like, right? It would look like Zeus and the Olympians, right? It would look like, we don't want it to look like that. We don't want this to be either a pantheon. We don't want that. We don't have a pantheon. There's God and just God. And we don't want it to look like like we want God to show that God is so righteous in God's righteousness that even God wants to put a check on God. We wouldn't want to put a check on God because God is perfect. But God is so perfect that God wants to put a check on God. And God wants to be reminded of the other argument, much like he loves in his servants Abraham and Moses, who give him opposition, loving opposition. When Abraham says, will you really destroy the city of Sodom if there are 100 good people in it? And God says, well, if there's 100, I won't do it. He says, what if there are 90 good people in it?
Right.
And he negotiates him down to 10. Now, of course, there still aren't 10, and he destroys it. Oops. But, which God said he was going to do it. Of course, since God said he was going to do it, no matter how much you negotiate with God, he's got to do it, because God said God was going to do it. This is the tension. How does that work out? Well, God still got the loving opposition from Abraham. And it also proved to God that Abraham was the kind of guy he was looking for, because he would stand up for people.
To God, yeah.
Right? Moses does the same thing. He says to God, will you really destroy this people that you saved? So, and what will people say about you? That you brought them out from the land of Egypt just to kill them in the desert? What kind of horrible God would do that? Moses says. And God says, okay, maybe I've been a little harsh. I'll calm down a little bit. Right? So God likes loving opposition. This is very clear. Yeah.
Is it fair to say that Jacob's wrestling with the at least messenger of God is again having some kind of conflict?
We like to use that as a metaphorical, like, oh, we're God wrestlers, people say, right? Israel, we struggle with God. That's how he gets the name Israel, which means to struggle with God.
In the text of God and man, he struggles both with God.
Well, fair enough.
Okay.
Indeed, he does. But in any event.
Well,
I think you can see that. Yes, I think it's an example you can use.
I mean, God.
I just think it's trite because it gets used a lot, but that doesn't mean it's bad.
But
That doesn't mean it's a bad example. It's a good example. But yeah, so that's the setting we're in. So Hasatan says to God, well, God, he's so great, but then again, it should be easy to be great. If everyone loves you and you have a lot of influence and nobody challenges you and you have a lot of money and you have all these family members, and if everything's great for you and your life is only blessings, who wouldn't bless God? And God says, well, I think this is a different sort of God. I think we're creating the kind of person that I wanted to create, right? When God opens in Genesis and says, let us create, of course he means let us in the royal, when the king or queen used to say, like, let us receive, like, they meant me, right? They didn't mean us as in the many plural kings and queens, right? So I'm just saying, God's not in plural here, but in the royal the royal first person, God says, in Genesis, let us create human beings so that they will become essentially the kind of people will be when redemption comes. Perfect human beings. Now, of course, they're not perfect right away, as God finds out very, very quickly. Free will is a much bigger impediment, to being good than God thought it would be maybe at the very first outset. God knew it would be a process for us, that we wouldn't be perfect out of the gate. But my point is just that and that we would get there, and that this guy could be an example of a step, right? Just like the evolutionary steps, Job could have been one of the steps towards that perfected, redeemed human being. And so he says, he doesn't need the blessings. He's good. Hasatan says, well, I have an idea then. Why don't we put it to the test? Let's take away his blessings. And God says, fine, you can't hurt him. No permanent damage to him at first. But you can do anything else you want to him. So he kills all his family, all his children and grandchildren, and he takes away all his money and his property and leaves him destitute. But still Job praises God.
Naked came I into the world.
Right. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. And then, a line I'm going to be saying at a funeral on Monday that we always say at funerals, from verse 21 of Job, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. We say this at funerals. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. Job says, it wasn't mine to have. It was always in God's purview to give me. If God has chosen now to take it away, That's God's choice. Blessed be God. I had it for when I had it. That's a perspective that very few people are capable of that. Okay, and now we'll turn to chapter 2 as we've now fully recapped in 15 minutes our thing. One day the divine beings, right, and this, the B'nai HaElohim, which is the children of God. In this case, it says children of the great because we don't want to say children of God because it sounds, but it means the angels, essentially, right? Presented themselves before God. The adversary, Hasatan, came along with them to present himself before God. And God said to Hasatan, "Where have you been?" Hasatan answered God, "I have been roaming all over the earth." Right? Because unlike all of these other angels, Hasatan is always testing people on earth. That's Hasatan's main job. And this is that you can see in that the seed of how the Jewish Hasatan and testing people grows in the Christian development of the mythology around this character to be a kind of trickster, right? This is how you get the guy goes down and tests people, and suddenly there's a golden fiddle involved. A couple hundred years, right? The devil goes down to Georgia looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind and he was way behind and he was looking to make a deal. You guys seriously don't know this song? There's no way.
Yeah, I heard it.
Okay, I'm just saying, he's trying to, like, this is how the seed is this, and it grows into this character of, that obviously Milton and others will embellish and define and name. But this character starts as a guy who, this is his day job. He's like an accountant. He goes around and he's like, "What are you doing? Is this good? Good? Not good? I'll report on it." He's like, he does TPS reports. He's not he's not like the ruler of hell or anything. He does reports. That's what he does. Right now he's got a special assignment and his name is Job.
It's fair to say that's the Jewish view. The Christian,
yes, right.
Particularly with Milton, God is a malevolent, not God, Satan is a malevolent power, almost the equal of God.
And by the way, you need to add malevolence. The power part is a choice on the Christian's part because there's no indication in Jewish text that this character has any kind of near divine ability beyond what God gives angels to do. God gives different angels different abilities. Some of them can, right? We've seen them be able to just change, kind of like shapeshift, not shapeshift, but they can appear as whatever they need to appear as. Some of them can do other, as their role that God has designed them for requires them, so they have ability. But again, because they have no free will, they have only purpose. Hasatan's purpose is to test. So to that effect, he has the power to kill whole families and stuff, but only because God gives him said power, not because he is powerful. The Christians add the malevolence. Now, again, he's doing all these bad things, but I try and see him as, like, again, a neutral. His job is to present the other side. That's the purpose he was designed for. And so to that effect, since God is the ultimate good, if you ever stand opposed to that, it's going to seem like you represent malevolence, like you represent evil. But I don't think that's the intention of this character at this point. At this point, I don't think he approached this task saying, "I really want to get Job." I think he might want to be right if we're trying to characterize, if we're trying to personalize, and I'm not sure we should, an angel. But if we want to try, you could say perhaps that he's he likes his job. But I wouldn't say he's malevolent, and I certainly wouldn't say our characterization says that he's anywhere near a divine power. Certainly there's no indication that he fights any kind of battle against God. He serves God. We believe, I guess, he still serves God to this day. Satan works for God. That's an eternal thing. We don't have the idea of some kind of any of that. Anyway, So God says to Hasatan, because he's been right. Hasatan did the thing with Job, and then he had other jobs to do. He was like, okay, I took away all the stuff that God said I could take away. Now I'm going to go talk to Plony and see if his bread is really good or he puts bugs in it, right? Which wouldn't be kosher, and then he'd be a sinner, and I'd have to report to God about it, right? That kind of thing. So he's like, okay, I've been roaming all over the earth. What are you talking about? I've got a job to do. And God said to Hasatan, have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, which is again what he said last time. A blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. God adds this time. Despite all the calamities that have befallen him, he still keeps his integrity. So you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason. This doesn't mean he's not critiquing Hasatan. He's not. He is critiquing him, but he's not. It's not like a condemnation. By said you've caused me to do. What he means is, you said that he wouldn't be this way when I took it away, but he is. He's still this guy. So what do you say now?
You're wrong,
right? No, but not just you're wrong. God's saying, tell me you're wrong. Say it. Say it to me. Say you were wrong. Which, again, God treats the angels this way. God doesn't really treat human beings. God treats human beings in different ways, and certainly God sent the flood. So God, we can't, we're not going to say God's never done anything to a human being that God's done to angels. But God does I do get the undercurrent that God loves people more than God loves the angels, and I get that. Sorry, angels. They were first, but we're like, it's like the difference between like that wolf dog that first licked a hand 10,000 years ago and a golden retriever. You'd rather have a golden retriever.
Yes.
Is it as useful or powerful? No. But you'd rather have a golden retriever. And that's humans versus angels.
Why? More friendly.
It's a lot more friendly. It's a lot more adaptable in your everyday life. It's a lot more comfortable. And it provides more emotional response because they've evolved more to softer eyes, softer ears, softer facial expressions, so that we'll like them more. It's just better. It's 2.0. We're 2.0, and angels were 1.0, and I guess that's what we're saying. Anyone who's tuning in, they're going to be like, why does this guy hate angels so much? Hope I don't get visited by any.
Now there are two angels coming in and one.
Right, exactly. We'll call it Hanukkah past and no, I'm just joking. Okay. So he said, right. So you what do you say, eh? So the Hasatan answered God. He says, or ba'ad or it's a proverb, skin for skin, but it's an ancient proverb. Meaning a person is always prepared to sacrifice the skin of another instead of his own. Alternatively, someone in danger will use the skin of his hands to protect the skin of his head or some other critical limb of his body. Continuing, all that the man has, he will give up for his life. In other words, so what's he saying, right? And then he says, Hasatan says, but lay a hand on his bones and his flesh, which you prevented me from doing the first time, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face. Right? And again, blaspheme is he's using a euphemism, because what he says in the Hebrew, he says, v'ga and touch el atzmo ve'el basaro, his bones and his flesh, imlo, and he won't be able el panacha, to your face, yivarechacha, to bless you. Why? Because the angel isn't allowed to say that someone should curse God. He says, he won't even be able to bless you. But what he means is he will curse you. Not that he won't be able to bless you, he will affirmatively curse you. To preserve his own life. So he's saying, this is just a guy who he doesn't care about stuff. And he doesn't care about other people, as Satan is saying. This is a very, again, we're getting Hasatan and Hashem have two very hafuch views, two completely upside down views of this guy, it seems. Hasatan saying, well, hey, you wouldn't let me touch him. He doesn't care if all his kids and grandkids die. He doesn't care if he doesn't care about any of these, about his money or property or influence. All he cares about is his life. Right?
I have a question. We teach people to give up their lives to protect their buddies.
Yeah.
And they do.
Yeah.
So where is the idea that we protect our skin now?
Well, no, okay, let's put it this way. In the United States military, for instance, people are trained and are willing, because of a lot of other things, to die for each other.
Absolutely.
Okay, but in I'm gonna get in trouble on the internet. In certain places in the world, really low trust societies, there aren't armies like that, right?
Okay.
In Yemen, there is no army where people are willing to die for each other, right?
In America.
I'm saying that's only true once you've built a society like America. Once you've built Western societies that have been high trust for over 200 years, then you have people, when your societies are built on something like that and everyone buys into it, people will die for the ideas and each other, because dying for each other would be seen in the military context, would be seen as a service to your people, your nation, and your family. We tie all those things together in our civic religion. That's what we've done. We do that so that people will do that, because if we don't, they won't. So yes, I'm saying, I think generally Hasatan's not wrong about the idea that there are people in the world who will who if it happens to someone else, they don't care. If it happens to them, they're very concerned.
Well,
right? If there's risk to someone else, they don't care. If there's risk to them, they're very concerned. I'm not saying they're good people. I'm just saying they exist.
we'll add a corollary.
Okay.
I've treated a lot of combat veterans.
Yeah.
The thing they feel worse about is that they didn't do enough to save their buddy.
No, I understand. I'm just saying.
It goes.
But that's here in this country. You never
Okay.
treated a Somalian soldier, right? You never treated a soldier from Equatorial Guinea. You never treated a soldier from Namibia. So
Well,
let's.
that's true, but
These are different places.
But Canada and England have a similar ethic.
Right? Yes, because they're Western liberal democracies.
You're talking about military. What about the deaths and the provocations that occur on subways and people?
Right, exactly. That's the thing. Right. That's as much what this is referring to as like just that he's like, okay, it happened to someone else. That sucks, but I'm still here. That's not a good outlook on life. But Satan is saying that's the reason he's still willing to bless God, because he just doesn't care about those things.
But you're talking about non-military sacrifice. People do that.
Well, for our family,
Or
but
even for strangers.
Not that often,
Not that
and
often.
only in certain places and
I'm
situations.
saying it happens every day, but I'm saying people put themselves second.
Some people do. You're right. Some people are Job. Not that many, but some. You're right. There are some people that are just. We want more good people out there.
Yeah.
We want people who are willing to look out for other people and care when other people are in danger and
In a
whatnot.
Jobian society.
Maybe we'll see at the end.
Oh, there are the things.
But right, we'll see at the end. I think he's a good guy. I'm not sure we should. I'm not sure he's a. I just think it's a very weird story to idealize.
All right,
But that's just me.
but I'm bringing up the point that people will do anything to save their own skin, and yet.
Yeah, again, that's what Hasatan says, because he sees also. Keep in mind, Hasatan, as a tester of humanity, sees people fail a lot, right? So Hasatan's outlook on life is probably going to be different than God, who, as a loving parent, wants to see all people be good.
Yeah.
So Hasatan is just like, oh, God just loves this guy too much. God doesn't know how people really are.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell God how people really are, because that's my job as the advocate.
So much for omniscience.
Well, but it's not that God doesn't know. It's that God, again, this is part of like tzimtzum, areas in which God chooses to retract what God's
So
self
watch the.
from the universe, so that the universe has room to exist.
Yeah,
And part of that leaves room for things like free will in human beings. And part of that leaves room for God to believe the best in us, so that God doesn't destroy us even when we do terrible things. right? This is God choosing love and mercy in this instance over judgment. But that's God's choice. God could just flood the earth again if God wanted to. So anyway, in verse 5, right. We said that. So in verse 6, God responds to Satan. So God said to Satan, see, he is in your power. Only spare his life. Okay, so now you can hurt him. You can't kill him because then after all, if you kill him, we won't know we won't know what happens. So you can't kill him, but you can do whatever else you want. So Satan departed from God's presence and inflicted a severe inflammation on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Not only is the afflicted individual greatly tormented by such a disease, but it also forces him to maintain a distance from others, as it is contagious. Right? He got a shchein, it's a terrible rash, a shchein. And so not only did he suffer from the physical symptom, which was very painful and uncomfortable, and the itching all over his body, but he was also rendered miserable, lonely, and contemptible because of it, because no one could be near him. No one would want to be. He took a potsherd to scratch with it, and sat in the ashes. The itching caused by the boils and the resulting lesions were aggravated by the woolen garments customarily worn in the days of Job. Thin ash is a soft and gentle surface that is soothing for one whose skin is inflamed, and it would have eased the pain of the boils on the severe itching. His wife, who isn't dead, or just his kids and grandkids, I guess, said to him, you still keep your integrity. Blaspheme God and die. Such a nice wife. His wife said, right? So, right, you're still God-fearing, but right, if you blaspheme God, God will kill you, and then you'll be free of this pain. The only way to evade suffering that's brought on by God is to die, she was saying, essentially. But he said to her, you are speaking like one of the disgraceful women, as any shameless woman, you can guess what that might be, might talk. Right? He's like, boo you, whore. Right? That's basically what he's saying. Sorry, Mean Girls. Should we accept only good from God and not accept evil? For all that, Job said nothing sinful, right? Do we stipulate that we will only worship God if God provides us good things? He's literally making God's argument that he has to be this kind of person because that's the rule. And he follows the rules.
So everything that occurs is from God and to be accepted.
Right. He said his life was not worth living. He was broken, tormented, and ill, but still he would not utter anything negative about God. When Job's 3 friends, great friends, the best friends, some say, when his 3 friends heard about all these calamities that had befallen him, each came from his home. Eliphaz, the Temanite, Bildad, the Shuchite, and Sophar, the Naamatite. They met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could not recognize him, and they broke into loud weeping. Each one tore his robe and threw dust into the air onto his head. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. None spoke a word to him, for they saw how very great was his suffering. That's very nice, actually. For all the criticism these guys get, for a week they just sat there in friendship with him, to sit there in sorrow with him, to say, hey man, you're mourning, you're suffering, we're here. We're just here with you.
Here's where they're decent.
Right, here's where that's a great comfort that they did for that first week. Then they're going to have a conversation, which is going to be dumb. Well, not dumb, elucidating, but not great for their characters. But this was a very nice thing they did. I've got no critique about this relationship, especially their pastoral care in that moment, because they recognized nothing they were going to say was going to make him feel better. Better to just be there and wait for him to make the first move.
Psychiatrically, that's a very great strength to recognize I don't have anything that I can offer, but I can be with you.
Absolutely,
In
yeah.
fact, that's
Right,
really.
and that's the part of psychological care that they teach rabbis in school, just about being a non-anxious presence, about being comforting in that way.
Power of listening.
Yes, exactly. So that's Job chapter 2. Do we have any reflections about Job chapter 2? We got the confrontation that leads to the new rules for the Hasatan between Hasatan and God, where Hasatan is now allowed to harm Job, and he does so immediately, and Job is suffering. And then Job's wife has a conversation with him, which she says, "Why don't you just curse God? So that God will kill you and you can be dead and not have to suffer." And Job says, "That's not the rules." And then his friends come.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's a regrettable aspect of Job as the pawn in this argument with Satan.
So we're seeing Job as a pawn of the argument.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean that's a traditional reading of the text. The Job is right, is the argument on which the canvas on which the argument is happening.
And it's hard because you sense that God loves him for being who he is, but will nonetheless
allow this to continue happening to him, right?
Yeah.
You want God to say, especially at this point, you want God to say,
Enough.
hasn't he passed at this point? The test just keeps getting harder and harder. And no matter how many times Job passes, it doesn't end. It doesn't seem to end. And it gets hard for Job even. At the end, even Job says, "Hey man, not man, God, but like, hey, I'm about to tap out here. This is you've subjected me to truly an unfair amount of nobody else on earth has to suffer this way. Or very few people on earth have to suffer the way you've made me suffer, in particular."
But he has faith in God. By the way, there's a good statement in medicine, which is medicine is a behavior humans engage in while God cures the patient.
Yeah. That's true. It's a good reflection point.
It isn't quite as arrogant as what some doctors say.
I think it's probably a better outlook, though. I think it's probably
so.
a better way to think about
I
it.
never know about you, but I went to medical school hoping that power was going to be bestowed upon me.
Power to give and take life.
to save life, to heal. And it took some years before what you're saying dawned on me. I can maybe facilitate things, but I can't heal.
If you were the chief of psychiatry, you'd even know in spades that
you would have just learned the lesson over and over again.
Yeah. Well, you had to learn to accept that lesson and do what you could to make people comfortable.
True.
I have a rather mystical story to tell you all, and it has to do with Job. But I was living in Little Rock, and I was in my mid-30s, and I was going through some terrible physical.
So 10 years ago.
Thank you. You get
a good comment.
He gets a quarter after the session. So, and it was really awful, and I was almost, like you were just feeling beat up every day. And I was to that point that Job gets to. I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And I was sitting there alone, and I heard "Go read Job." It was as plain in my head, and I did. And there's something about misery loving company. This got me through that. And now today, that all is over.
It's true. I think there's a corollary to that. That's, I think that we see on social media the kind of inverse of that, where the fear of missing out, the idea that people only put their best selves presents to us this idea that no one is suffering but us.
True.
Which is not true, of course. No. Even the people who sometimes are pretending they aren't suffering are suffering worse than you, perhaps.
Exactly.
We don't know what happens in other people's lives, is the truth of it. And I do think also that Job is a good, I think it helps to know that suffering is a condition that exists in the world.
Yeah.
and that it's not permanent. Yeah.
Well, and I would say, Mitzi, the voice that you heard, that has always fascinated me. My profession's first tendency is to offer a reductionist psychological principle. Well, your wisdom, your memory is telling you that you knew this and go back and read it.
Right,
And that's possible. But so is the other possibility
Right,
that didn't
right. It
happen.
could be either or, but
Yes.
whatever it was, it worked. But
Yeah.
I have all my life felt very comforted because of it,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Well, good.
Mhm.
That is good. We'll move to chapter 3. Sometime after Acharei Chain, it says there's another one of our dagesh no dot or no dot letters. The word after the hyphen, chain, could be Cain normally, but without the dot, it's chain. But not chain like grace, right? Like God's chain, chain v'chesed v'rachamim, grace and love and mercy, the 3 of the biggest attributes of God. But chen, like this and after, is kind of what it means. So the translation here is afterward, but it means like sometime later, Job began to speak. So okay, they were there 7 days and 7 nights. At some point, Job started speaking while his friends are there and cursed the day of his birth. Right? So he didn't curse God, but he is. He's not in case you would think he's some kind of monk or something, some kind of Buddhist who just doesn't care for things and the earth, like nothing, like he's not a nihilist or a Buddhist or anything. He's upset, desperately so. He expressed here his pain over having lost everything and questioned the value of his life in this lowly state. But of course, the important thing is he cursed the day of his birth. He did not curse God.
But God gave him his birth.
Yeah, but it's not the same thing.
Okay.
You can curse circumstances without cursing God.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's like God made the tree, but if a branch fell on you, you could curse the tree, right? It's like it's like, but God made the tree. Ooh, like it's not a catch-22. Not everything is that, goes to that level.
Okay.
Cursing God is a really specific. We're talking about real blasphemy here. Okay. There's a reason they use blasphemy and not just curse when they say can't bless. They say do a blasphemy. So what does Job say? He says, again, we got Yovad. What does Yovad come? What is the root of Yovad? Avad. Think of the destruction.
All right.
Right? The collapsing of the temple, for instance.
All right.
Abade is destruction. Perish the day. Here it's perish, but it also means destroy. So perish the day on which I was born, and the night it was announced. A male has been conceived. So also his conception. Curse that too. May that day be darkness. May God above have no concern for it. May light not shine on it. May darkness and deep gloom reclaim it. May a pall or a cloud lie over it. May what blackens the day or terrify it. But that's not a good. Another translation might be, may this day be terrorized as if by day demons.
As if by
day demons.
Oh, day demons.
I don't know what those are, but that's what the commentary suggests. Or other evil forces that appear every day. So common evil forces, I guess. Don't know. Maybe he's just referring to like the bad things that befall people. He's just calling them demons. You know what I mean? May obscurity carry off that night. May it not be counted among the days of the year. Oh, this poetry. May it not appear in any of its months. May that night be desolate. May no sound of joy be heard in it. May those who cast spells upon the day damn it. Those prepared to disable Leviathan. Right? So what is it saying here? They who curse the day, who prepare for rousing the Leviathan, may they scorn it. Those people.
Would you say a word about what the Leviathan is? And
Leviathan is a whale.
right.
Something very large.
So the Leviathan is a whale. They call it a sea monster because they're ancient. They're not seafaring the way we are. Their ships are like 4 or 5 person boats. They're not like 200 people boats. So they don't have the scale really to understand whales. At this time, we believe the Mediterranean was a little deeper, came inland a little more, was higher a little bit, and therefore whales would have come near the shoreline of the seas.
Okay.
And they would have only seen it from that, but it would have seemed like, and again, you can only see the tops of it generally. You don't see the whole whale. As far as they know, it goes 200 feet under the earth and might one day rise all the way up and destroy it again. So Leviathan is a whale. In reality, in conception, it's a sea monster, a dragon, a giant sea creature that could destroy that could destroy maybe not the world, but could certainly cause a lot of damage.
Okay.
Is there any evidence that anybody in the Mediterranean used whales for any economic purpose?
I don't think they had the ability to
Okay.
at that time. When the Romans do, I'm sure of it. I know the Romans have whale usage. So by the time of the Romans, maybe even by the time of the Greeks, the Mycenaean Greeks in about 400, 300 before maybe even then they're doing it. I don't know. At this time, no. I mean, at the time of the Torah, no. I don't believe they're killing whales to use their blubber or oil or ambergris or anything to make or perfumes or oils or different or heating element. I don't think yet, but they will eventually. All people will. Everyone will at some point. May its twilight, this is still the day of his birth and the night of his conception, we're talking about. May its twilight stars remain dark. May it hope for light and have none. May it not see the glimmerings of the dawn. Because it did not block my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth, expire as I came forth from the womb? Now, look at this, because this line rhymes with what?
Doom?
Kohelet.
Yeah.
Sure.
Better to have been stillborn.
Yes,
Yeah.
this rhymes a little bit with
Sure.
the idea from Kohelet that if one who doesn't live a good life, it is as if they ought to have not lived at all.
Yeah.
And here he's doing a weird and a mirror darkly version of that, saying, if you were just going to give me so much to bring me from the highest highs to the absolute lowest lows, what purpose could there be in such an existence? Why would you do that? He's saying in his own, again, wisdom literature, he's not Kohelet, but he's giving his own version that you can learn from, in which he's saying it would be better for me to be dead, for me to have never lived, than to be like that stillborn, who would then still be better than the person who seeks and seeks but does not find. Right? We're making a hierarchy now. We've got the person that Kohelet talks about is at the bottom, and then the stillborn, and then this guy.
Yeah.
Right? Right? We're making a hierarchy of suffering now of whose life is, and Job is kind of contributing to that conversation here in his poetry. Yeah.
Historically, can we place Job? Is he after Solomon? Is he before Solomon?
Oh, he's definitely after
He's
something.
after Solomon.
Let me look up.
No.
Oh no, never mind. I'm sorry. I'm wrong. Apparently, it's is set during the patriarchal period,
Oh, really? Okay.
2100 to 1800 BC. But the writing of it, which is when I really place it, because that makes a lot more sense, is the Persian exile. So 6th century to 4th century.
Gotcha.
And that's when I knew it was written then. Theoretically, it takes place, but again, it makes actually more sense for it to take place in the Persian period in some ways. But I see why. Okay, so it takes place in the patriarchal period, but yeah.
Well, it means
But
these ideas were going on
Well,
in Judaism for a long time.
well, maybe not. It could just mean that they wanted to set it then because Remember, the closer you are to the source, the more authentic something is.
Right.
So if he was around at the same time as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that gives him a lot of legitimacy in the world, in his place in the world, and especially for worshiping God, than it would if he did it in the Persian period after the exile. Everybody's suffering, right? People will read it and be like, we're all suffering. Anyway. Right, so he says, why were there knees to receive me, or breasts for me to suckle at? For now would I be lying in For now would I be lying in repose, asleep and at rest, with the world's kings and counselors who rebuild ruins for themselves. Right, because what is he saying there? Or nobles who possess gold and who fill their houses with silver. What is he saying about those in these 3 lines, 13 to 15? This is also Kohelet, right? This doesn't just rhyme. This is Kohelet.
Yeah, and this is saying it's just as good to be non-existent.
Right. What is he saying? He's saying kings and counselors and nobles and rich people build palaces to their death. But when we're dead, we're all the same, so it doesn't matter.
And that would be,
which is also what Kohelet says, that it doesn't make sense to worry about things like wealth and whatnot. They're hevel. Why? Because they dissipate. Because when you die, it doesn't matter what kind of tomb you're buried in. God doesn't care and you won't either. Right? The pharaohs built pyramids for themselves, but Judaism says that's hevel. It doesn't mean anything. You don't get a better afterlife because you built a giant pyramid. Or if you were just in the dirt.
It's fair to say Job was not, of course, there when God talked with the Satan.
No, he was not.
And so he's just saying, what's the purpose of all this?
Right, exactly. So this is where we get, this is why it's wisdom literature, right? Exactly, yes. He's exploring in his lament the nature of suffering and the nature of life. Which here is directly echoing Kohelet's thought. The repetition should teach you about its importance. Yeah.
I would be lying in repose, a very strong implication that death is peaceful.
Yes, asleep and at rest.
Yes.
Yeah, right. The idea is that death is peaceful and without pain.
Yeah.
Once you're dead, sorry. Not that every death is peaceful and without pain, but that once you're dead, you are at peace and without pain. You are bound up in the bond of eternal life, we say in the funeral service. Again, he's going to talk a lot about suffering and death. But what he's saying is, I would be asleep, dead, just like the kings and counselors and nobles of times gone by, because we'd all be the same then, and I wouldn't be sitting here suffering.
When did Christians and Muslims come up with the idea that when you die, you're punished and hurt, and it's miserable, and you don't?
So the Christians get it from the Jews. In the Second Temple period is when we started really doing a lot more eschatology. We started doing a lot more like what happens after you die. And that's when the Talmud starts wrestling with the rabbis that will write in the Talmud, start or speak and then be written in the Talmud, will start wrestling with the ideas of what happens afterwards. Do you just die? Do you die and your soul communes with God? And that's what El Malei Rachamim says. We say, let the soul of our beloved person who is passed, right? May their soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, and may they dwell b'Beit Adonai in the house of God forever. Right, like the Psalm said, like Psalm 23 says. So it could be that, or it could be Olam Haba, which is some people think is a version of heaven. Or Olam Haba could be here on earth after redemption. We're not exactly 100% sure which of these options it's going to be. We're certainly not as certain as Christianity cared a lot from its very, again, eschatology was really big around the Second Temple period in all the Jewish sects. And I must remind everyone, Judaism, it's funny because when you prove it this way, it's like, well, Judaism is the world's largest religion, right? Because one branch of Judaism is Christianity. So early Christians were a branch of Second Temple Judaism. There were many branches that didn't make it to the 21st century as Jews. Most of them didn't make it at all. But the Karaites are still around, but there are very, very few of them, but they're still around. But again, like a couple thousand maybe. We're not talking many. The Essenes are gone. The Zealots are gone. The what's their names?
The Sadducees.
Well, Sadducees and Pharisees is a distinction that doesn't make any. It doesn't play a role in Jewish life anymore. It's just. But there were these Jewish groups that just aren't around anymore. The two major groups that survived were the Pharisees and the Pharisaic group in one sense. The rabbis would establish rabbinic Judaism as the successor to Temple Judaism. And the Christians would stay a part of Judaism until I forget which council. There was at some point they recognized, both because of the antipathy that Jews held for them, because they were, again, according to Judaism, they were outside
the bounds.
Right. Their beliefs were outside the bounds of Judaism, so they weren't Christians who said, well, we're Jews and you're Jews, but we do this other thing. We're not welcomed in Jewish communities because Jewish communities we only want the Messiah we're looking for. So they eventually took that hint. And in fact, unfortunately, because it wasn't that nice, their immediate legacy with us was not one of brotherhood and cousinship, but was one of rivalry. And once at first, that didn't really mean any difference because Christians were being persecuted by Rome and Jews were being persecuted by Rome. And at the beginning, Rome couldn't even tell the difference. They were all just Jews that they were happy to persecute. Obviously, once Rome becomes Christian, they are then able to tell the difference and they choose just to persecute us. So that's obviously becomes the birth of the power of Roman Catholicism.
That was a political decision by Constantine because they needed a single religion.
I know that history. I'm not weighing in on the history. I'm just saying what happened to the Jewish communities of the ancient Near East and the Mediterranean when those decisions happened. That was really where the two never were again to really talk. Actually, it wasn't really until that divide lasted from Constantine, by the way, all the way until Nostra Aetate in the 60s. Yeah. When the church essentially declared that it was a new era. And that the biggest declaration, of course, being fraternity and filiality, brotherhood with the Jews. And rejection of the idea that Jews should be forever persecuted for their role our perceived role in the persecution of Jesus.
And am I remembering correctly, Heschel played a role in that?
I think a lot of the big thinkers, this was the Pope at the time, they really wanted to, again, they did a lot more with that than just the relationship with the Jews. They removed some of the traditional Latin Mass and allowed churches to practice in the language of I'm just saying, they did a lot more, the church did a lot more of modernizing in that council and declaration than just this. But from our perspective, certainly the biggest thing was recognizing that the Jews are loved by God, recognizing that the Jews have a relationship with God that can't be broken. The Catholic Church obviously can't say that it's an unbroken covenant because that would place them outside the bounds of the correct covenant, so they can't say that, and that's fine. We're not looking for people to go by our language and stuff, by the way. Just that they be good enough to allow us to exist and not encourage their people to hate and persecute and murder us by telling them, well, they are responsible for your Lord and Savior's death or something. So when they changed those rules and said, actually, we should be friends with the Jews because the Jews were the first chosen of God. Again, they say first because they've got their own belief and relationship and chosenness, and that God said in Genesis that God's covenant with the Jews would be everlasting, and therefore, obviously, there's a reason the Jews are still here. All these things were in Nostra Aetate. You can go back and read it. Yeah.
Is it a Russian Orthodox Church?
No, they still hate us. The Orthodox churches still hate us.
No, they were the starter. They were the 19th century major anti-Semites.
Yeah. They're still big anti-Semites.
Yeah.
The Eastern Orthodox churches, no, they still hate us a lot.
Really?
By the way, there are still segments, we've got them here. SSPX is up in St. Mary's.
Yeah.
They hate us too. And in fact, they totally reject all of Nostra Aetate.
Oh, yes.
The mass changes, the Jews stuff, all of it. They reject all of it.
And about
Yeah.
about Jesus getting killed and the Jews being basically responsible.
Yeah.
I've always thought even Judas, and if the Jews play a part in it,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure they did, but that was the prophecy. It had to happen that way.
That's my rub, actually, is always the thing, is that the Catholic Church made saints of Judas and and I think the guy who stabbed Jesus with the spear
Really?
to kill him. I think they made saints of both of them. So if they think it was so good, because again, they need that to happen in order for the sacrifice to be effective for what they're claiming in their thing, then they needed this to happen. So why are they mad at the Jews?
Exactly.
The answer of why they're mad at the Jews has nothing to do with Jesus. They're mad at the Jews for the same reason a lot of people are mad at the Jews. The Jews swim against the tide of history. The Jews are older than the church. The Jews are older than everything, essentially, that still exists on earth, except maybe China. The Jews are older than everything. And there's a danger to anything new from the old. People might go back. This was a fear there was a fear in the early church, I would say, of delegitimacy, of not being legitimate because the people you succeeded are still here. You claim supersession, that God has chosen you and not them. But they're still alive. They walk the earth. This is a logical inconsistency that the church has never been able to truly. So what did the church say? Instead, the church said, well, their existence is meant to be a persecuted one, as punishment and as to show people why you should choose to be like us, which is certainly a power argument, although not a very nice one, not a very kind one, not one based on love and the kind of things that, as I understood, that their teacher, Jesus, was teaching about, but I don't need to go into the dichotomy between the history of the Catholic Church and the teachings of their Savior.
What's driving anti-Semitism now?
Anti-Zionism is driving anti-Semitism now. So anti-Semitism, this is not really what this class is about, but I'll do this since we're online and we're doing this. Anti-Semitism has had three major forms over the last couple hundred years. 200 years ago until about, from about the early, not the early church days, but from about 800, 900 until about 1600, 1700, the major form of anti-Semitism was anti-Judaism. I'm going to use anti-Semitism in its place. It's the middle one. But anti-Semitism is the catch-all term for Jew hatred, designed by a guy who hated Jews and wanted a word for it in Germany in the 19th century. And again, I'll get to that, that's racialized hatred. Anti-Judaism was religious hatred. It came from Muslims and Christians in the sense of saying, you are rejected by God and we are your successors, and so we will, if you're in a Christian country, the Jews and the Christians, to be fair, must not walk on the side. It was like Jim Crow. You can't walk on the sidewalk if a Muslim is walking. They can do all kinds of things to you. You have to pay a special tax just because you're a Jew or a Christian. That's how it is in those places. And if you were in a Christian country, they would, if you were in Eastern Europe, sometimes they go around and Cossacks would come through and smash up your homes and kill people. And in Western Europe, they would invite you in so you could do business, and then they'd kick you out because the people were mad. Let's kick the Jews out. Or they'd do a disputation where you'd have to get up and defend yourself against an archbishop. And when your people wouldn't convert, they'd come and destroy your synagogues, which happened in Paris a year before Ramban's famous disputation of Barcelona. Rabbi Yechiel of Paris was who the Jewish disputant was. So that was anti-Judaism. That was anti-Semitism that was the longest period. That was like 800 to 1700, almost 1600.
And theologically based.
Yes, anti-Judaism. It's a religious-based hatred. All of the arguments for why the Jews deserve to be persecuted in that form of anti-Semitism come from our religion and our being rejected by God in favor of others and our persecution, that kind of thing. Every version of it finds a way to justify why you're a good person for persecuting and killing Jews. The second kind that was the late 1700s, this was in the age of rationalism and the Enlightenment. From the late 1700s to the 1700s to about the mid 1800s, about the late 1800s. Even until, let's say, 1945, quite frankly, up until 1945. That's a good date to put the end of it. You can guess why. Anti-Semitism is the second form of Jew hatred, of anti-Semitism. But again, of Jew hatred. And anti-Semitism is racialized, racialized Jew hatred. You don't hate the Jew because he's rejected by God. You hate the Jew because there's something in his blood that makes him a usurious leech who just takes from society, right? You've heard this language it's every Nazi, whatever. They're subhuman. They're different from us in race, in humanity. They're not human like the rest of us, is what they would say. And again, the Nazis were just the last of this major group of people who subscribed to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, again, being racialized Jew hatred, where Jews are hated as a race. Post-1945, obviously, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, anti-Semitism fell out of favor in many places, though certainly there are people today trying to help it make a comeback. But anti-Semitism took a back seat because of the Holocaust, and we saw where it led. The new dominant form that had already emerged, but wouldn't emerge in the West until after 1945, for the most part, would be anti-Zionism, which would hate the Jews for expressions of Jewish power in a Jewish state. And you see this, it's the prevalent form today, from 1945 until today. And you'll see most people, a guy with a Nazi tattoo, and again, why would he like a Nazi tattoo? Well, his beliefs line up very nicely with anti-Zionism, where they also hate the Jews. So, and he used to be a right-wing guy. He voted for Collins, he was dating a right-wing lady. He used to be a right-wing guy. He had a Nazi tattoo on his chest, a Totenkopf, which was the death's head symbol of the camp guards. He's an anti-Zionist. And he says it's okay to be an anti-Zionist, but anti-Zionism is a form of Jew hatred, and the most recent one. It denies Jews the right to live in their ancestral homeland because it seeks to return Jews to a state of powerlessness and vulnerability that Jews haven't experienced since the creation of the State of Israel. It wants to return Jews to powerlessness because of the perceived sins of the State of Israel. It blames every Jew in the world for it. Because again, it's these are all anti-Semitism. Jew hatred is always a totalizing hatred. And so in this case, anti-Zionism is the dominant form of anti-Semitism today. But those are the three anti-Semitisms that you should know, because they will, even today, all three will appear in different ways. So it's worth seeing. So anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism all still exist today.
That can be mixed in the same human.
Sometimes, generally, they're dominant in one area. Like you're not generally, like, here's the thing, like if you're an anti-Semite, you're probably an anti-Zionist, but because you're an anti-Semite. Does that make sense? Like you're against Israel, but it's because the Jews live there, and you hate the Jews because of their race. The language is different, is what I'm saying. Anti-Zionism, for instance, uses the language of the left and social justice movements. Anti-Semitism uses the language of the right and blood and soil nationalists. The language is different. So you rarely see, now you do see some people, like David Duke has spent a lot of time in the last 5-10 years really studying up on anti-Zionist language because it's allowed. You're allowed to be an anti-Zionist, right? You see people all the time saying, well, anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, even though it is. And so he wants to learn that language so he can blame Jews for stuff, but in language that's societally acceptable today, as opposed to the things he used to say, which we all decided were not societally acceptable. So he won't say those things. And now he says, well, I could have been okay with the Jews, but they kill so many Palestinians. They're just killers. What does that sound like? Totalizing hatred that combines all Jews everywhere with the actions of a government or something in order to encourage hatred and violence against Jews. And so that's the world we live in. Thankfully, I'll say here in Kansas, we haven't had the same kind of problems, Baruch Hashem, thank God, so far, that Jews have faced for instance, in Canada today. you know that in the last 2 months, there have been over 10 shooting or bombing attacks at synagogues in Canada.
I didn't
Well, I
know
was-
that.
No, you wouldn't, because the news doesn't cover any of it. But the Prime Minister of Canada just had to give a speech that everybody hated, and a commission which had people that like Hamas on it, because they're his political allies, because he's on the left. But he gave a speech that nobody liked at one of the biggest synagogues in Toronto, Holy Blossom, where two of my friends are rabbis, by the way.
My cousin was bar mitzvah there.
It's one of the it's maybe the biggest synagogue in Canada. But he gave a speech there because anti-Semitism is at such a fever pitch there. It's also terrible in the UK. Why is it worse in the UK and Canada than here? I can't say it on the internet. Yeah, go for it.
Immigration.
Yes.
Immigration.
Yes, because when you bring people from countries that hate Jews and teach their people to hate Jews to your country, you can't be surprised when more people who hate Jews are in your country. You brought them here. You literally brought them here. You bought them plane tickets. Jews helped resettle them. So did the Catholics, more than us. But to be fair, but Jews helped put these people from Syria and Afghanistan and whatnot here. And then their kids grew up to say, "Lol, let's kill the Jews on the internet in our country."
Now, had the Pope come out against the state of Israel?
I mean, he's not pro-Israel. No, he frames it as being anti-war. But some people focus on how his critiques seem to over rely on Israel as evidence that he is not like some of his predecessors. He's probably better than Benedict. He's probably not as good as nobody's going to be as good as John Paul II. First of all, not for the Jews. There's never been a pope for the Jews that's been better than him. But even then, Francis was mostly fine on the Jews for the most part. He probably won't be as good as him. He's got a lot more leeway because he's an American and has relationships with a lot of Jews. Most popes go into the office, the popedom. I don't know what it's called. Papacy. Sorry. Yes, of course. Most popes go into the popedom. Most Jews go into the popedom. I was about to say, which would be great, but isn't going to happen. Most popes go into the papacy not knowing many Jews. Francis lived in South America. There aren't very many Jews there. Benedict lived in Germany after World War II. There weren't many Jews there. Most of them don't live in places with a lot of Jews, or where they know Jews. And certainly before World War II, no pope would have ever been interested in interacting with Jews.
But Leo does know them, doesn't he?
Yes, a lot of them from Chicago. Yeah, no, Leo knows lots of Jews. They visit him and bring him White Sox kippas and stuff. Another rabbi just did it last week. A lot of Jews know him, and he lets them come visit the rabbis and stuff that he knows. And so again, he feels a lot more leeway to criticize Israel because again, he's lived with people who criticize Israel his whole life. He knows Jews. I don't think he hates Jews. I just think he's prone, as many people are, to focusing on the Jewish state, which in its uniqueness is exceptional, and holds it to a higher standard than he holds other nations, which is one of the standards of modern anti-Semitism, is Natan Sharansky's 3 Ds of when critique of Israel crosses over into anti-Semitism is delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. So he does the last one. He holds Israel to a standard he doesn't hold any other nation that he talks about. We don't like when people put Israel to a double standard. If he's not going to critique Pakistan, and he's not going to critique Saudi Arabia, and he's just going to critique the Jews, doesn't feel good.
You can even critique the United States for it.
He does, though. He does actually. He condemns the United States still. On the war on Iran, he had a lot to say about both of us. Which again, it's if Israel hadn't been involved, would he have said as much? I don't know. That's the kind of question we live with, and we can never know the answer. We just have to live. You know what, though? Jews would be tempted after our history to be suspicious of everyone in that way. But Jews are also required. A mitzvah that we're commanded to do is dan l'chaf zechut, to judge to give the benefit of the doubt
Right.
is what that means essentially. To judge on the good hand is literally what that phrase means. But what it means is to assume the best of intentions.
Mhm.
No,
Can that be dangerous? Maybe, but that's the way we live derech eretz. We have to live in peace with our neighbors. And the only way to do that is to assume they're not going to murder you.
Mhm.
You know, that's the Jewish way. We have to live that way. Okay. I'm gonna ask you to pause at this line because I've got so much more to say, and we do not have the time for the rest of chapter 3. So I'm gonna say we're gonna pause at verse 16 in chapter 3, and pick up here in 2 weeks when we start again.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone who joined us online and around the world.